only, Manual Cinemas, Ada, Ava, on Friday, February 23rd, 860-685-3355, wesleyan.edu/ca.
You're listening to 88.1 FM WESU Middletown, a community service of Wesleyan University. Up next is The Business Buzz with Jeff Sherman, taking a look at innovative and cool technology and businesses right here in Connecticut. Catch The Business Buzz each and every Friday afternoon at 4 p.m. as part of our Monday through Friday 4 p.m. local talk block, only on 88.1 FM WESU Middletown.
The Business Buzz on WESU is proudly sponsored in part by Carlson and Demir, located right here in downtown Middletown. Carlson and Demir providing legal representation for victims of serious injury and for those facing criminal charges. On the web at carlsondemir.com, 860-819-1034.
And welcome to another edition of The Buzz. I'm your host, Jeff Sherman. We have Marty Keena in Studio B, as well as Chris Calandra. And it's a special Studio B-led show. So I'm going to have those guys in Studio B take it from there. And you're welcome to call in at 860-685-7700, 685-7700.
So, Marty, happy Friday.
I'm glad to be here. Glad to see you once again.
So you and I haven't been in Studio B
together
in several weeks.
Absolutely.
So I know you got here a little late. We haven't had a chance to talk much, which actually I think sets this up pretty well.
Lends itself to its normal Friday.
Yeah. So I think the topic du jour, as it should be, is the tragedy that happened in Florida. What was it? A week ago on Thursday, I think. So I was thinking we could talk a little bit about that. I've watched a lot of TV on it, and the emotions are running high. I thought maybe, Marty, if it's okay, I could start at the beginning and get your opinion on a couple of different things. Okay. I believe this is a topic that there'll be some common ground between you and I, but I believe also there'll be some other areas where we might not see eye to eye. To begin with, you have this young individual troubled, and the local police apparently visited the home 39 times over 2 years without getting arrested. That strikes me as really, really wild.
Yeah.
What's your impression of that factoid?
I think the number is troubling. I'm not sure that once you hit 15 or 20, you automatically get arrested. So I don't know how the number comes in other than the fact that it's a troubled family. Perhaps the incidences that were reported weren't warranting, arrest, but it certainly did warrant maybe putting some red flags on that address so that when things did go wrong, they realized that there had been a pattern. So not knowing whether that occurred or not, again, I find it troubling that there's a family that was that much in crisis. My question to you on that one is that the family that had taken him in when he was somewhat homeless, or was that the biological family? That's a good
question. The stuff that I had read was that the police were dispatched 39 times in 2 years to the address he lives at. So I don't know if it was the same address or multiple addresses. That's a good question. I'm just surprised because, for example, with domestic violence, my limited understanding is that, if my wife and I are in any type of physical altercation and the police get called for whatever reason, if they determine that one or both parties put their hands on one another, it's an automatic arrest. The officers don't even have discretion. And that's to kind of allow for cooling down period. And actually,
I just want to interject one thing that I think both parties get arrested.
Yeah.
No, okay.
So I'm surprised 39 times, including some physical stuff that I guess went on. I don't know the details, but it's hard to believe in 39 visits there wasn't an arrest.
Or at least some sort of a social worker that had been assigned to the family to ongoing kind of, I don't know whether it would be family therapy or some sort of, inclusion of some sort of family visits every now and again, some checkups. He would hope that there would be some stopgap measures where they would have goals that they would need to meet, especially at 39. Once you get to a certain number, he would imagine there'd be some sort of a number of steps that should be taken through social services. Obviously, that didn't take place.
Yeah, social services, including mental health, especially because he also was having trouble at school. I believe he was even thrown out of the school. All right, so that's kind of step one, at least in my mind.
Right.
Step two is the FBI gets two tips about this individual. And for years coming out of 9/11, we've had this public mantra of see something, say something.
Right.
Public is encouraged to call the authorities if they see something. Encourage that even if it's nothing, let us check it out. If you see something, say something.
Sure.
So this happens a couple of times, and the FBI, at least in one of the two instances, doesn't follow its own protocol and follow up on the threat, including the bad guy saying something like, I'm going to be a professional school shooter.
Especially online, it wasn't just hearsay. There was some evidence that things online had been said. Facebook or wherever.
YouTube,
Yeah, exactly. So, I think in some instances they dropped the ball there too. There were a lot of signals, whether it was local or national. This is why tragedies occur, is that perhaps there were warning signs here and they just were either ignored or mishandled.
So I know there's a lot of emotion on this, watching the listening meeting that Donald Trump had, all of the different students that have come forward, very impressively, by the way, and speaking passionately about the hurt and what they want to see happen. I am surprised that there isn't any emotional passion about how law enforcement let them down. That's not to say being mad at the NRA is wrong. It's not to say that criticizing Donald Trump or the Republicans or anybody else for that matter isn't also fair game. But I'm surprised that these students haven't felt like they were let down by those that are charged with defending our citizens.
Well, I think that just recently came out in regards to the sheriff who didn't go into the building.
That was going to be my next thing,
So I think, one, that's kind of shocking because the guy was a sheriff for over 30 years and should not have been afraid. I mean, there's nothing wrong with being afraid when you're going into a situation where there's an active shooter. But when you're charged with protecting that group of people and you know that there's carnage taking place within the other side of the door and you don't take that move, I think this guy, I think he's already been fired. He's going to have to move from the community because I think there's the lack of trust at this point.
So let's just catch everybody up, Marty. We had an armed, what's called resource officer, a deputy armed that was assigned to the school.
Right.
From the reports that I read, he was not in the building when the shooting began, but he went to the freshman building because it was a freshman wing. I know in Southington, where I live, it's kind of the same thing. There's the bigger high school, but there's a segmented part of the
it's like a
building
school
that's
within
just
a
for
school.
freshmen. So he took up a defensive position outside of the school, quote unquote, he has said, apparently, to set up a perimeter and coordinate police action.
Right.
The thing about that is, like with the FBI not following their own protocol, is that since Columbine, lessons were learned from Columbine, what was it, almost 20 years ago? And the protocol is when you get to the scene, you enter the building and you act. You do not wait for SWAT. You do not wait for reinforcements. You go in and act.
You engage.
This person was assigned to the school, so you would think there would be an awareness of this is what I need to do. And if you saw the sheriff, did you see the sheriff speak yesterday?
I did not.
Super emotional.
I would imagine so.
Visibly, you could tell he was angry. And one of the media folks asked him something to the effect of, what would you have had him do? And he said simply, he should have entered the building, addressed the killer,
and
killed the killer.
Yeah.
And you're right. He was suspended without pay pending an investigation, and he shortcutted that and voluntarily resigned.
Yep.
So with the local law enforcement and the 39 visits, we don't know the nature of all of the visits, but that's an awful lot of visits.
It is.
I mean, I would imagine in that town, that's probably in the top 1% of visits to a house with nothing seemingly happening to help anyone involved in that situation.
Right.
Then you have the FBI gets a few tips, including something glaring like, I want to be a professional school shooter and I'm going to shoot up the school.
Yep.
And it wasn't passed from Washington or the central office or whatever to the local
to the
office
tip center,
in Miami.
down to,
But
going back to the idea of the social services, if that community is anything like other communities across America, that's a part of their social fabric that's often understaffed, it's often underfunded, and there probably could have been just a handful of supervisors or therapists or however they want to be labeled that would be able to deal with the number of families that are possibly in conflict and crisis. So not to negate the fact that something should have been done, but oftentimes it's the social services that, where were they? But when you look at the structure of the social services that are provided in the community, they're oftentimes underfunded and understaffed.
that is a fair point, and neither one of us are an expert in this, but part of it is probably a money thing. Part of it seems to me, too, is that social services and mental health, I think we've moved to much more permissive than we used to be about medications and care and institutionalized and monitoring medications. You know, my understanding is if you have somebody that's mentally has a lot of mental issues, even if you're a spouse or a parent, it's incredibly hard to get an intervention because the permissiveness is more of, you know, letting them take medications, go to a psychologist, but it's all voluntary. And if somebody unplugs from that care or unplugs from that medication, there's no defense against that. And things can spiral out of control for that individual as well as the community that they're wandering around in.
Yep.
So,
and then if I could take it to
please.
the next level in terms of the FBI conversation that we were having, all of a sudden on social media, there's been an attack, you know, when we were talking about how oftentimes there's these bots that automatically kick in to take advantage of certain situations. And here was a classic case where, you know, all of a sudden there was that contrary point of view that was coming, attacking the FBI, attacking individuals. That one kid that was an outspoken leader at the school, you know, he was actually being attacked by these folks online as a trained speaker, a fake voice, an actor, you know, trying to protect his dad, that kind of thing. So, you know, it's amazing that when we have a tragedy like this and we're trying to find answers on maybe how to fix it, there's always that other side of the coin that's agitating and trying to muddy the whole environment. So I found that rather disturbing.
Oh, my goodness, absolutely. 100% agree with you. Just completely disturbing. I think that's the right term. So we're going to talk about this some more. We have obviously many more steps. So we'd love to have some people participate as you're listening in.
860-685-7700. You're listening to The Buzz on WESU. You're with Chris Calandra, and I'm Marty Keena. We are in Studio B, and we have had a coup. We've taken over here the studio today, and Mr. Sherman is sitting back having a Corona.
So let's talk about the aftermath of this. A lot of people have really strongly come out and say, finally, we need to do something. We've had these multiple times. We thought things would change after Sandy Hook. In many ways, they did not. We've had many, many shootings in schools and elsewhere with these mass casualty events.
I think there was something today actually in Louisiana at a university. So
really?
Yeah, there always seems to be a shooting somewhere, but we always hear about the ones that are the horrific ones.
Yeah, I mean, the statistics they're appalling how often this happens. So let's talk about gun control first, and then I'd like to talk about some other issues because this is a multifaceted, deeply complex issue. So let's talk about ARs. So what is your view in terms of banning ARs, which is kind of a broad definition.
Sure.
I'm not a gun expert, but
Right.
these basically long rifles that are not automatic like the military use, but they're meant to mimic them, and they seem to be more deadly than even your handguns.
Right. They're easier to shoot, it seems as though. They're lighter. Someone of a slighter build can still manage them. I think the gun itself, is not something that I can speak of other than it's a semi-automatic. I think it's more the bump stock piece that is more of a issue that can, transform these guns into something more deadly. That's a small step to take without taking the gun out of somebody's hand. By just taking an augmented piece off of it, you sort of diminish it a little bit.
Yeah.
So even though it may not have stopped everything, it at least would be a step forward, and people could at least stop talking about that piece, and we could then go to the next step.
Yeah.
So
No.
I in terms of that gun, I have issues in that, it's not a hunting rifle. Perhaps there are other guns that are more appropriate for some folks. The fact that some kids can get them at a certain age, I think, is an issue. That they can get them at 18.
That's what I was going to ask you.
Go ahead.
But before we go there, you mentioned something that disturbed you, which is well placed. I'll tell you something that disturbs me is that these people that say, that won't fix anything, is just a stupid response.
What's that?
Nobody thinks that there's one thing that's going to fix anything.
No.
So if I make a suggestion, or the president makes a suggestion, or the NRA, or the Democrats, or the Republicans, or these youngsters in Florida, anybody that makes a suggestion, if the response is that's not going to fix everything, the responder is an idiot, because nothing is going to fix everything.
Right.
But if you could piece together a number of different things up and down the line, maybe we could make a dent in this and really make it so that Parkland was the last time this happened.
Right.
And it really bothers me that that's the defense, and I've seen both sides do it, that it's not an adequate defense. Are you under any illusions? Do you think there's one thing that would fix everything, and then
No,
we
there's
all
not.
live happily ever after?
No, as I mentioned, if we just took the bump stock possibility, we
think-
limit, the deadliness of a particular gun that wasn't deadly, or, it's more deadly with the bump stock. So
Yes.
if we could take that augmented piece off, that's one thing. If we could make the process of vetting folks
I wanna talk
a little
about
bit
that.
stronger, we even see it within the system. That gentleman that was shooting in Las Vegas, I believe, had some troubled history in the military, and that information had not made its way through the system to augment what we already knew about that individual, or may have been nothing that we knew about him, but because other factors that there's information. There's not a centralized kind of way in which we can, find out who has a problem and why they should not have a gun.
So we've touched on a few things. I think you and I agree. Right now, the age for a handgun is 21, but the age for a long gun, including ARs, shotguns, more traditional hunting rifles, is 18. I'm a Second Amendment guy, probably more than you. I have shot. I am actually a gun owner. I'm not a gun enthusiast, but I'm at complete favor. Raise 18 to 21 for an AR. I'd probably vote to leave it for shotgun and traditional long rifles that are more clearly hunting sportsman-like.
Yep.
And I think that's likely to happen. What do you think?
Probably so. Maybe more of a traditional hunting rifle, like kids out in Pennsylvania and Iowa, where it's part of their cultural and their family heritage. That we shouldn't be taking that away from them.
Right.
But at the same time, to be able to buy an automatic weapon, no one goes hunting with an automatic weapon.
Yes. So we have a caller that's going to be
Awesome.
joining us. Who do we have today?
Jeff, do you have somebody that's over there that would like to participate in our conversation today?
Sure. This is Chris.
Hey, Chris, welcome to the show. This is Marty and Chris over here in Studio B. What are you thinking?
I think that I had to go to the Social Security Administration yesterday, and I had to go through a metal detector with 2 armed guards. If you go to court to pay your parking ticket, you have to go through a metal detector with 2 armed guards.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a veteran. If I want to go to the regional headquarters, I have to go through a metal detector with 2 armed guards. Why do we protect government employees more than our children?
Mm-hmm. Are these guns that we're speaking of, because you perhaps have a little bit more knowledge than myself, are they made of a material that would be detectable that way, or are they more of a composite?
Yes, anything that, well, some of the detectors have a density detection, and some pick up just on metal. So some will only pick up hard objects that aren't metal as well, like a ceramic gun.
Okay.
But the fact that calling for a ban on a certain style of gun because it kills more people is like banning a Ferrari because it can break the speed limit. You know, the military rifle before the AR was wooden stocked, no pistol grip. It held not more than 10 rounds. I can't remember what it is.
Was that the M16?
No, before the M16 was the M1 carbine.
Oh, yeah, right. World War II, the M1, yeah.
But Chris, let me. Your name was Chris, right?
Yes.
So think about the practicality of it, and I understand what you're saying about, guns don't kill people, people kill people with guns. I get that argument, but talk about the practicality. I don't know how many schools there are in this country. If you go from elementary school, middle school, high school, and you start hardening them like the government buildings, that's an enormous proposition. In your opinion, if you were voting on this issue, that's something you would like to see happen across the country?
I'm cheap, so I wouldn't like to see it, but there are so many weapons already in America, you're not going to get rid of them. A background check isn't going to stop a kid from going in his dad's gun safe and bringing something to school.
True.
Okay.
All these things that we want to do wouldn't have stopped the school shooting that's in our state. The weapon already existed. It didn't belong to the kid.
Right. And that is a little bit of the troubling part of the argument for banning ARs is
right.
Even if we did that today, it might solve the problem in the future, but in the short term, it doesn't at all deal with the multitude of ARs and other firearms that are around the country. I think there's 300 million firearms in the country.
There's a gun for every person, child, whatever, in the country right now. So there's.
I'm not saying there shouldn't be some kind of law in effect to change how weapons are, but that's not the only thing that we need to do.
We agree. So just a couple of things that Marty and I were recently talking about. Right now, you could buy an AR at 18. Do you have a huge problem if we increase that to 21?
You can't do that in this state.
Why not?
You can't buy one.
Okay, but
in our state they banned so-called assault weapons.
Yeah, but there are versions of the AR that have gotten around Connecticut rules, and I know
yes.
I could go. So just in general, though, nationwide, would you be okay with a 21-year-old, 21?
I wouldn't be opposed to an age restriction because this generation's children stay children longer.
All right. And what about having more stringent background checks, which Marty and I are going to talk about in a little bit. But it seems like this background system that we're using might not be adequate enough.
I think that they should enforce the checks that are already on the books as laws.
Right.
The FBI should have checked this guy out. There should have been something in his record already if the police went to his house how many times, even if it wasn't.
No, I agree with that. What you're saying is the background check system, I think it's NICS, right, doesn't really need a whole lot of inputs. It really needs the information that's already required to get into the system so that the system has good information that the federal government could use. Is that your point?
Yes. I mean, that there was another shooting where a guy had a domestic violence charge in the military.
That's right.
It didn't get crossed over, so he bought a weapon.
Yes. And one of the troubling things, Marty, is, and you mentioned this too, is that, in many of these instances, the government, as much as we want the government to help us, the government often is also part of the problem. So with what we talked about with the armed resource officer and the local police and the FBI, and this other example where the department, the military, I guess, was supposed to put this in the background check system, but it failed to do so. And then when the person went to buy a firearm, the information wasn't in the background check system, so the person was able to buy the firearm. So having a background system is only as good as the information that makes its way into the system, right, Chris?
only as good as the people running it, unfortunately. And
What about the
we end up
what about the opportunities to buy the gun? It seems as though that there's a lot of background check paperwork and such when you go into a facility that's, a licensed gun shop per se. But it's my understanding that if there was like a gun show, at the Civic Center or,
when people call it a gun show, you think more of a business doing it. If you think of flea market,
there you go.
A swap meet,
yep,
or it's you selling a gun to me or me selling a gun to you.
Yep.
There's
a loophole.
Yes, and
Yeah.
I think that you're supposed to transfer paperwork. I am not sure, and I know there's no background check.
Yeah, you bring up a good point, Chris. And actually, we'll let you go. Thank you so much for calling in and adding to the conversation. Marty and I and Jeff appreciate it. So, Marty, what he's talking about is the idea of the gun show loophole is a little overemphasized in the sense that if you go to the Civic Center or the Connecticut Convention Center in Hartford for a gun show, there's no loophole there.
Right.
But if you go to, like he was saying, the flea market, or you go to your neighbor and, let's say a gentleman passed away and the son is there cleaning up the house and there's a gun. He says, you want to buy the gun? And you say, yeah, and you give him some money and he gives you the gun.
Sure.
Yeah, that's going to be outside of the norm.
That's right.
And so with the background checks.
Which I think goes back to the fact that you're never going to solve the problem, right? But you could limit the number of people that could get access, I think is really where we're at.
Yeah, you choke it off as best you can, given that there's 300 million. I think we have another caller.
Oh, awesome. Hi.
Yes, good afternoon, gentlemen.
Hey.
I thought I would throw in my 2 cents this week.
Awesome.
So there's a couple things, not that I'm disagreeing with anything, but a couple things that relevant points I'd like to point out is that this in 1994 we had the assault weapons ban in 1994, which was allowed to expire 10 years later in 2004. In addition, Congress has not taken up the statutory provision known as the Dickey Amendment, which allows the CDC to research gun violence in our culture and to look at that. What are the health effects? What are the implications? So those two things are pretty interesting. And you have to wonder, why is that? And I think it's pretty clear. It's a lot of influence from the NRA.
That makes sense. That's a good point.
So there's a lot of missing pieces. Like you guys were talking about background checks. There's these issues that I mentioned. But
so in other words, the government really hasn't undertaken a comprehensive study of gun violence, the effects of guns, and part of that is political because you don't want to have a study where you might not like the results. So they prevent the study from occurring. That's your point? They don't fund it?
I think that's exactly the point. But with that said, I think gun violence also has, it has something to do with mental health, but not everything. It has little to do with age or race, religion, ethnicity. I think it's gender. Since, 1980, there's been about 90 mass shootings in almost all the states, with most of the shooters being white males. And what binds them together is this concept, if you ask me, of manhood and the glorification of violence in our culture, and attracts these antisocial men who live in isolation, who valorize violence. They become this civilian patriot.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And now they can do it live. And so they get an audience, which makes it even more provocative for them. Whereas, we see sometimes that, they'll do it on Facebook or they'll do some, whether it's shooting, or we had an incident here in Connecticut the other day where someone was attacking one of the local hospitals. If they can get their glory and go out in a blaze of glory, it feeds their, was their ego.
So I think that's a big part of it. The other thing is what we hear from the right is, they want to take away our guns. Nobody wants to do that. Nobody's talking about that. I think, but it brings up an interesting point, is that with regards to gun control, reasonable gun measures is, how about we just limit the type of weapon? In this case, the AR-15. Which is it. And the reason for that is many times they'll say, well, look, the percentage of crimes committed with an AR-15, comparatively speaking, it is very small. The issue, though, is the devastating lethal injuries that result from an AR-15 versus most other firearms.
No, I think that's a very good point. And I do think, and I'm probably of the three of us, the staunchest Second Amendment gun person, that argument of they're trying to take our guns away is too alarming and inappropriate for the days and times we live in. Nobody is talking about walking into my home or anybody's home and just confiscating guns en masse. Nobody's interested in that. We just want to be smarter and have a safer community that we all share, right?
Yep.
Yeah, so Chris, what do we do? So here's the question. What do we do with that? When we have the NRA who's fighting against that at every step, when they should actually be taking a leadership role, and they have an opportunity to do so and do it well.
I agree.
They don't do it. So
I agree. And because they do have as much influence and power, I don't know if I agree with how much influence and power some people say, but they wield an enormous amount of power. If they came to the table with some common sense, everyday man on the street solutions, the chances that guns are taken away actually go down, not up, by just being sensible.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you're right. The NRA should do that. It's actually in their best interests as well as all of our best interests. And I think after this, the way things are shaping up, you might get that, unlike in the past, and that's a cause of hope for me.
Yeah, one of my suggestions for them would be then to take a active role in the communities and offer workshops, and invite people to come, and not necessarily vent their anger towards guns, but to turn it around and to show where it could be a positive within the community. And you might actually see gun sales go up, because people would know this is how you use them, this is how you protect yourself with them.
Now, let me just call it before we let you go. Is on the other side is I found it offensive. I watched the town hall on CNN the other day, and Dana Loesch, I think I'm pronouncing her name right, was on, and I understand the emotion of the students. I understand the pain they're going through, but the viciousness of attacking a spokesman for the NRA, saying that she has blood on her hands and they're more interested in helping her children than she is not constructive either, and is out of bounds. You're not going to get anybody to want to help you come to a solution if you're that vicious and mean. That's not helpful either. Do you agree with that?
Well, so I didn't see that.
Okay.
But I did see, the piece. I believe it was the same thing with Marco Rubio, and there was a lot of back and forth on that and how he was treated.
No, I have no problem with how he was treated, because he they would ask him a question and he wouldn't give a straight answer.
Right,
that is terribly frustrating.
Yeah, but I think that is the frustration that they. Again, I didn't see it, but I believe that's the frustration they were probably conveying to the piece that you were referring to.
One person said, you have two children and we care more about your children than you do. Now you want to get Dana Loesch to sit down and deal with you. That's just, and I'm sure that's a small portion. I'm not trying to blow it out of proportion, but everybody needs to come together as Americans.
Yeah, I think if that was going to happen, and here's the crux of it, is that if that was going to happen, it should have happened. It would have happened. I don't think that's going to happen. When 20 elementary school children can be slaughtered and nothing changes, then I think we're at a different place now. I think we're at a place where we can no longer just politely sit across the table and ask. I think we have to demand. Yeah. We have to march. We have to stand up. Is the answer really to arm our school children and our teachers and to teach them active shooter drills? Is it to hide under desk and turn off lights and lock the door instead of addressing the root cause of the problem and passing legislation to take the AR-15 style weapons out of the hands of civilians?
Well, we're going to talk about a number of the things that you mentioned. Thank you for calling. We really appreciate it. And Marty, so I want to come back before we move on, talk about the background checks. Did you know that and for people that want to call in, we've had two excellent callers already.
860-685-7700 here at WESU at Wesleyan University.
Did you know that states are not required to add information into the federal background check system?
No, I did not know.
And so this is something, as an example, that the NRA is in favor of. And this is one of those common sense things is, like anything in business, the database you have is only as good as what's put in the database.
Right.
If I go into my database at work and it's crap information in there, I'm going to get crap results. And I think we get some of that. So I think that would be very good, where you could incorporate people that have a restraining order, people that have had mental health. I personally think that people that take a certain category of drugs, that should be put in the background. And maybe it's not like any one thing necessarily eliminates you, but if you have a series of them or multiple of them, maybe some scoring system or something, I think an enhanced background system would be very, very worthwhile.
At least it would warrant maybe a visit, a conversation, some sort of an interview. I think we have another caller, actually. Thank you for calling. What do you have to offer with us today? Thank you.
Hi.
Hi.
How are you? So I worked at a psychiatric alternative school for about 10 years. I have a little bit of a different look on this. Now, I just want to say from the beginning that I don't think anyone should own an AR-15.
Okay.
But there was 15 years of signs with this particular person, starting when he was about 7 years old, with broken furniture outside of the home, the police being called 39 times. The last time that his mom called the police, she was concerned that he was turning 18 and wanted to get a Florida ID card so he could purchase a gun. So the police came, and, he was abusive to his mother as well. And he was he was sitting in the back seat of the police car, and a person from the psychiatric services that he was receiving actually came to his home and gave him medication while he was sitting in the back of the police car.
Yep.
I think that we are, yes, gun control. I don't think we should have AR-15s. You should be 21 before you purchase anything. But there's a lot of kids out there that are in these schools right now, and they're basically being swept under the rug. If the public schools don't see them or hear them, then they don't have to deal with the issue.
Right.
But eventually these kids get released onto the world. I mean, it was well documented that he tortured and killed animals. It was well documented that, he, was destructive to his home, was abusive to his mother, had psychiatric issues for at least 15 years, well documented.
Sure.
And the school suspended him and sent him to the alternative school and basically washed their hands of him.
Right.
They sent out an email to their staff saying that he was dangerous, not to let him onto the campus because he was found with bullets in his backpack. Why that wasn't presented to the police, I don't know. It just seems like there's a huge hole. And, we can talk about gun control all we want, but the fact is there's about 15 million students, children, that are receiving psychiatric services right now. And what do we do with these kids?
Yeah, so I used the term earlier. Thank you. It's a great point. Very well made.
And what strikes me is the fact that he was a young man that was brought in by another family once his mom, I believe, passed away, and he had nowhere else to go. Yet when this occurred, they come forward and say, oh, he was the nicest kid. We never would have known any of that. Why wasn't a lot of that information that you just laid out made available to them where they were bringing that person into their home? Who dropped the ball there?
No, but the police went to that house. The police went to that house too.
Well, they didn't say that.
Cole, I wanted to ask you. I used the term earlier about permissiveness, about the healthcare system when you have troubled individuals, that law enforcement and the medical community and families are not empowered to actually intervene and act, and it's almost like the rights of the individual overtake the ability of family, the medical community, and law enforcement to intervene. Is that a fair assessment?
It is a fair assessment. We've had students that have been dropped off in the ED for up to 2 weeks because there's no bed. The parents can't handle them anymore. I mean, just as an example, this was years ago, but I've seen a 6-year-old try to take out 6 adults. You know, when you say that these children are, you know, don't have the strength or can't turn on a dime, or the parents, you know, the family that took him in said that he was the nicest kid. They could be, but they could turn.
Yes.
I've seen it happen.
No.
I've seen a 6-year-old try to rip out every hair on a person's head, and it took 6 adults to restrain that child in a permissive manner,
Wow.
you know, with
Thank
the
you.
state allowed manner. But you know, when you drop your child off at the ED and you're screaming for help, and there's just no beds, there's no help. The police come, they do an assessment. If the child is presenting calm in the ED, they release him back to the parents.
Right.
I mean, it's just, you know, and the schools do what they can, and if they can't control the student, then they send the child to an alternative school. But basically, their hands are washed because it's not their problem anymore.
Right. They just move them through the system. One last question. Marty and I were talking about this a little bit earlier in the show. Is this only a money thing, or is it also just how the rules and regulations and the guidelines work also? In other words, if there was a lot of money, more money on the table, would that solve the problem? Or do we also have to become more restrictive and more proactive in taking away people's rights when they're showing signs of mental health problems?
Well, yes. I mean, I feel that there shouldn't be, you know, there should be, if you're on a certain type of drug, you know, a series of drugs, if the police are called to your home that many times, it doesn't have to say in the database what is going on, but there should be a red flag there.
Right.
You know, when someone goes to purchase something, to say, well, there's an issue here, you know, you need to look into it further.
Yeah, and that's that enhancement of the background check. Well,
But-
thank you so much for calling.
You're
We
welcome.
really appreciate it. Have a great weekend, and I think that
Really?
was another great caller, right,
Yep,
Marty?
and it was great to have a female perspective because, as we heard earlier, that it seems to be a gender-based kind of thing, and she was bringing in the psychiatric aspect of it, which I think is important.
Yeah.
And you know, the fact that we have these callers, you know, and if we have other folks out there that want to participate, we have another about 15 minutes or so. 860-685-7700 is where we're at here at the Buzz at Wesleyan University, and I believe we might actually have another caller.
Yes, my name is James.
Hi, James.
I am an NRA instructor.
Okay.
And I can go through a couple of comments that I was listening to so far.
We'd
Yeah,
love
go
it.
ahead,
Thank
fire
you.
away.
First of all, the NRA does have several programs that are there for people to reach out and use. As an NRA instructor, I hate to tell you how many times I've taken somebody who's interested just to go to the range to understand.
Okay, good. What
They
else?
They also have the Eddie Eagle program. That is designed at teaching gun safety to children, young children.
Okay.
So we don't have those mistakes.
But listen, we get your point, and it's a fair one that the NRA does do a lot of community outreach. What else can you share with us, given your area of expertise?
On your AR-15,
Yep.
when you really get down to it, the AR-15 is a rifle. It's no different than the Ruger and Mini 14, which has never been on any band. It shoots the same cartridge. I think we have a lot of confusion where people are confusing a rifle over ballistics of a bullet.
So you don't think that banning the AR would be sensible, right?
I really don't. It has no effect. And not you. You're Marty, right? The other person.
I'm Chris.
That's Chris is speaking. This is Marty. I was saying the bump stock could just be one step to take that away, and it might, you know, start the process.
A bump fire could be performed on any semi-automatic rifle without the aid of an attachment.
Okay.
So there's a point most people don't know. Also, too, you know, like I said, the Mini 14, it takes a 5-round mag, it takes a 10-round mag, a 15-round mag, and a 20.
But your point is a good one. Is that a lot of people that are very emotionally looking for gun control and are anti-gun don't know the first thing about firearms, and they are ignorant when they try and speak about firearms. That's your point, right?
Correct. Now, I'm also going to bring up one other point that the last one was talking about.
Please.
Okay.
the Secret Service did back in the 2000s, late 2000s, an actual study on mass shootings.
Yep.
They identified 10 red flags. The school in Florida, the teachers knew of those 10 red flags and identified those 10 red flags.
Yes.
Okay? They did put out a warning that if they saw the kid on campus, the shooter on campus,
yes,
they were to call the police. There is the failure of the breakdown, of the start of the breakdown of what we're going.
Okay.
No matter what we do, it's not the gun. It is the person. Okay. And we need to have, and I'm going to bring one more, mixed background system. I heard you guys talking about that too.
Yep.
Only 38 states submit 80% of their records. The other states are not mandated to. So we have a big, huge gap.
That's crazy. That's crazy. That's got to change, right?
And NRA was the one who pushed the NICS system. We've been pushing for years to fix the NICS system.
But so let me just ask you this before we let you go. I understand that you want to defend the Second Amendment and that guns, your point is that guns are not the problem, it's people. What would you like to see change other than the background check? Is there anything else you could point to that you would like to see happen to help protect our communities?
All right, I'm 64, so I'm an old timer. When I grew up, we had rifle teams in school. That disappeared. We have made the firearms a taboo subject. What we really have to do, and this has nothing to do with any individual, but it really is, we are depending upon the government to do its job. We had this particular incident. The one in Sutherland is another good example. It took a guy with an AR-15 to stop the shooter.
That was the church. That was the church, right?
Yeah, it was a church.
Gotcha.
What we really have to do is these systems have to change. They have to start working, and people have to be held accountable for managing those systems to make sure they are putting out and can be accountable for the evidence they put in there.
Okay, that's a great point.
This kid should never have gotten a gun. The red flags were there. We had too many instances, but because he was a juvenile, most of that stuff is sealed up in juvenile court.
Yes. Well, thank you.
That is a major hit.
Thank you, caller. We really, really appreciate it. Thank you.
That's awesome. The fact that we've had such a wide variety of commenters here today, which is tremendous.
So can I ask you this?
But, we're running out of time.
Yeah, and hopefully we get another caller or two. But it seems to me that over the years, more and more kids have been prescribed strong medications.
Yeah.
I don't know if this individual was or not, so it may not be appropriate specifically for what happened in Florida last week. But you deal with a lot of kids. How much of that is our, I'm going to say, over-medicated, over-reliance on the kid's acting up, the kid's got this, the kid's got that, let's just medicate him, which...
There is a bit of a knee-jerk reaction in regards to that in terms of a learning environment, whether it's ADHD or other kinds of identifications where medication might actually help the kid focus and be successful.
Right.
One of the things that I think most of the callers had in common was that there needs to be dialogue. There needs to be conversations. And I know that the public schools in many ways are doing that. They're promoting social emotional learning. They're allowing, we have in our schools morning advisory where we sit around and we have topics where we lead them and we allow kids to not just vent, but to talk about things that they feel and to help clarify if information tends to get muddied. And I'm talking middle school, but I know that there are conversations like that at the elementary school where they bring up scenarios and they bring up opportunities for kids to talk about a moral dilemma. What would you do, kind of thing. So I think over time, if we're looking over a series of 5-6 decades, I think ultimately some of this will start to pay off where we'll start to see perhaps a dip.
All right. So in the time we have left, and I wish we had more time, Marty, so you're a football fan, right?
Sure.
So if you're watching a football game, say professional, and somebody runs on the field.
Okay.
Do you see them when they run on the field?
Like to watch them run onto the field?
Yeah, if you're watching TV at home.
Occasionally you get to see that if it's a big game.
The point I'm making is that no, the networks and the sports franchises have decided that when somebody runs on the field that they're not going to glorify that person.
You're saying the person that comes out on
Correct.
I thought the teams themselves coming out.
No. When somebody comes out on the field, like a fan runs on the field, they don't show that person.
No. Ever since Mike Curtis from the Baltimore Colts back in the day cobbled that guy.
So
awesome.
I think that the media, not on purpose, but is actually perpetuating this and making these sick losers famous.
Right.
And by plastering their picture and talking about their story, I think they're doing harm. And I believe, this is my personal opinion, I'm not a psychiatrist or anything like that, is that if we had, hey, there was a shooting in the school, 17 people died, you don't disclose his name, you don't show his picture, you don't say anything about his biography, you do not make the person famous. If you're a celebrity, there's the adage, like, there's no such thing as bad publicity.
Correct.
You know, even people that get caught getting arrested, if you're in Hollywood, it actually could help your career. It's a perversion.
It is.
And I'm not saying the media is doing it to have more of this to get ratings. You know, they're reporting, but in this 24/7 cable news world we all live in, I'd love to see them do it. If we could do it in sports, and another example is when a woman alleges rape, her name is not disclosed, and her picture is not disclosed, and it's not a law, it's not infringing on the freedom of press. So just as a society, we decided that's not really good, it's not healthy, and it doesn't do anything productive. And I think that would be a piece too, because everybody knows this kid's name, his picture, they know his story.
Right.
And I said this to somebody that's much more liberal than me, and they said, well, we need to learn from this and this, that. Yeah, the professionals, the cops, the teachers, the psychologists, the medical, you know, they could learn all about it, but we don't need to have 24/7 news coverage where we hear, and you notice I didn't say his name once.
Right.
That piece of crap's name is not uttered 24/7 for days on end.
Right. I totally agree. I think we overkill, no pun intended, the perpetrator, and so I think we need to understand that it's been horrific, and we certainly should start to spend more time about the families and lending support and having these kinds of conversations where, perhaps we could actually stumble upon a solution. And
another one is it's very hard to find footage, or on a 9/11 memorial, they don't show footage of the planes hitting the Twin Towers.
Right.
It was just decided that was gratuitous, wouldn't be shown, and the country was better off. And I wish we would I wish there was a way that the media, maybe the major networks, CNN, Fox, MSNBC, could come up. Now, you're still going to be able to see stuff on YouTube, and I know there's no way to shut it off.
You want to go out and find it, go find it. It shouldn't be just shoved down your throat.
Yeah, I agree. Well, I think this was a great discussion.
Can I just bring up something?
Please.
We have one news item, possibly. I think we're getting the okay from Studio A. Is that, I've had this to talk about for the last couple of weeks, and it's unfortunate that we now have it here, is that Homeland Security has funded a $5.6 million program, which is a simulation for teachers to follow these kinds of situations where, there's been a shooter. I know in our school we go through simulations, and we go through lockdown drills, and we talk to the kids how important it is to follow directions, and we have our strategies. This is called EDGE, the Enhanced Dynamic Geosocial Environment, that was put together by Homeland Security and an Army Research Laboratory. And these simulations are put out there so that teachers can watch them, and they can perhaps learn from these simulations on what to do to take part in making your particular place safe. So, there are some things taking place out there. There are some programs being put out there for schools to take a look at to, perhaps make their environments that much safer. And I know in the school system that I'm working in, we're very much about that. But I thought people would like to know that there is this computer simulation that's out there that might be available for folks to take advantage of.
Very good. Jeff, how did Marty and I do taking over the show this week?
He woke up from his nap.
I think it was a A+ show in all seriousness. I think you guys did great. I think the callers were awesome. And I think, that was you guys did an amazing job. And I'm glad I kind of let you guys run with it, because you took the ball and you drove it to the finish line. And I say that in all seriousness. I thought
Beautiful.
It was a excellent show. And, we'll
Thanks
be
to
back.
The callers, too. Awesome.
I thought it was amazing.
Always.
It's a hot topic. It's and the other thing I will add is it seems to me, Chris and Marty, that, it used to be going postal.
Yeah.
I think if you're a nutcase and if you want to go out in glory, it seems like the new thing to do. Is
It's trendy.
Go to the school.
It's trendy.
And like you said, Chris and Marty,
Yep.
you're going to be even though you're a loser and you're a scumbag, you're going to go out and you never did anything in your life, but guess what? You're going to be famous like all
somebody
the
will remember
rest
you.
of them.
Yeah,
So
it's really a
thank
shame.
all of our listeners and our callers in Studio B. You did a fantastic job. I really mean that. And we'll be back next week with
Only Manual Cinemas Ada Ava on Only Manual Cinemas Ada Ava on Friday, February 23rd, 860-685-3355, wesleyan.edu/ca.
You're listening to 88.1 FM WESU Middletown, a community service of Wesleyan University. Up next is The Business Buzz with Jeff Sherman, taking a look at innovative and cool technology and businesses.
Only Manual Cinemas Ada Ava on Friday, February 23rd, 860-685-3355, wesleyan.edu/ca.
You're listening to 88.1 FM WESU Middletown, a community service of Wesleyan University. Up next is The Business Buzz with Jeff Sherman, taking a look at innovative and cool technology and businesses right here in Connecticut. Catch The Business Buzz each and every Friday afternoon at 4 p.m. as part of our Monday through Friday 4 p.m.